I'll call to order the May 14th regular business meeting of City Council. Mr. Hamp, will you lead us in Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome all our visitors here tonight. Oops, there's everybody's staffing it, Mr. Hamp. The smart people's at home. All right.
Now.
I don't reckon I need to remind any citizens that there's a sign-up sheet in the back for any of the speaking parts, so we'll jump over that. The first item of business is consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Item 3, matters from council members. Anybody have anything they wish to present tonight? If not, we'll move to number 4. Item 4 is consider introducing the annual appropriation ordinance for the fiscal year ending June the 30th, 2019. Mr. Hamp.
Mayor Allen and members of council, the ordinance that you have before you reflects the add-delete list, which was presented in advance of the public hearing at our previous business session.
Are there any questions from Mr. Hamp? Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman, or Mr. Marks.
That's right, Mr. Marks.
Somebody down there, thank you. The council meeting will consider this and all other ordinances introduced this evening at the next regular meeting. Item 5 is to hold a public hearing and consider introducing an ordinance amending Chapter 38, Article 3, inoperable vehicles of the City Code. Mr. Hamp.
So the proposed amendments presented this evening for your consideration and subject to the public hearing amend Chapters 38 and 82, updating and bringing those sections of the City Code into conformity with the State Code. In doing so, we now form the basis for additional work to establish policies and procedures for municipal regulation of inoperable and abandoned vehicles, including removal of such vehicles from private and public property when lawfully established to be in violation of either the inoperable vehicle or abandoned vehicle ordinance. I think it would be important for the council, if you are not already so, to be aware of certain key provisions in particularly Chapter 38, which include the following. Notice of violation can be accomplished by posting, personal delivery, or United States Postal Service. And in cases in which notice is furnished through the mail, it shall be assumed to be provided within 24 hours. Upon notice of a violation, property owners have 10 days in which to bring the property into compliance. The city must furnish notice in cases in which the city removes a vehicle to achieve compliance. It must furnish a second notice to the owner within 5 days of such removal. The city must hold the vehicle for 21 days prior to authorized disposal under the Code of Virginia, which is public auction initially. The city is exploring, because we anticipate significant work in this area of abandoned and inoperable vehicles. We are exploring heavily the ability, both lawfully and practically speaking, to outsource enforcement program elements. And we think that doing so will significantly enhance the volume and efficacy of the program. I think it's important for the council and the community and our staff to be aware that environmental laws of recent time and adoption now impact the storage, the proper responsible storage of vehicles, and also to be aware that because DMV data are restricted in terms of dissemination, significant cooperation between the building official's office and the police department is necessary to accomplish lawful enforcement. A couple of key, several other key elements of which I think council should be aware. The first being that draping non-rigid materials such as tarpaulins or tarps generally does not achieve compliance under the code. The items must be screened by rigid material, fences, or structures. I'll ask Ms. Michelson in a second to explain sort of what staff has come to refer to as the 1+1 requirement, and I'll also ask Ms. Michelson to talk generally about the financial implications of how the city can assess and recover expenses associated with enforcement. But I think I've covered sort of the key programmatic elements that we're hoping to accomplish in the ordinance. I think, too, one additional item that I would draw your attention to, and that is the definition of screening, and that is, or what constitutes a violation. And essentially, it's when a vehicle is visible from an adjacent ground level property, so that, for example, and I'm sure Melissa will correct me if I misstate this, when you have a case of looking down from a property in an elevated second-story window, for example, that does not necessarily under the state code constitute a violation. It has to be sort of passing the property from a public right-of-way or a private property. Having said that, if you could, Ms. Michelson, comment on a couple of those items like the 1+1, the financial implications, and any other large element or program elements that I may have overlooked in your view.
The 1+1 vehicle, to back up a little bit, the Virginia Code allows localities to limit the number of inoperable vehicles that are not in buildings but are screened from view. And so the minimum that you can have is one. So what I've designed the Waynesboro Code to reflect is that you can only have one inoperable vehicle that is not inside a garage or a building, a structured building, but is screened or shielded from view. However, there's a little bit of an exception to that, to the extent that if the homeowner is actively working on repairing or restoring that inoperable vehicle, they're allowed to have one additional vehicle which can be inoperable itself in order to effect those repairs. And there has been cases where people have two, and then they say, oh, that other one, is for working on my car. So that's really an enforcement issue as far as, the homeowner has to show that it's being actively worked on, not just sitting there, rusting or what have you. So if, enforcement goes out, in June and it doesn't look like a whole lot's going on, and then they go back in September, take some more pictures, and it's in the same status, the court would held that as a violation because it's not actively working on it. So that's just a little of an exception to the limit of one inoperable vehicle outside of a building. The financial implications is that the city can assess the fines that we've revised the code to, it could be really either a criminal, which it was before, or a civil penalty. And we've changed it from a criminal to a civil penalty, which can be assessed not only against the owner of the vehicle, but the homeowner, the real property owner, if indeed that's a different person. So the first notice goes out to the homeowner to say, you're in violation, you need to correct this. And then if it's not corrected and the city follows up, the second notice also goes to the vehicle owner that the city's going to remove it, if not, the 5-day notice. So the financial implications is that you have two people potentially to go after for the civil penalty, but also the homeowners, it creates a lien on the real property that can be assessed just like any other, if any monies are owed back to that person, tax refunds or anything else, could be taken by the city as them owing money to the city, and that makes a lien against their property. So it's an easier way to recover from the homeowner and or the vehicle owner, because a lot of times there's not value in the cars. If the city ultimately has to sell the car or recover any of its costs associated with that, it can do that as well. But any deficiency in those costs to the city can still be recovered against the landowner and the vehicle owner.
So I think that constitutes the substantive presentation of the ordinance updates. I would say, to reiterate, once the ordinance amendments are adopted, there remains some significant work with staff to establish, first of all, to complete the examination of the extent to which the enforcement can be outsourced. And that would be primarily from impound or removal, storage, second notice, disposal, et cetera. And then also how in other cases of enforcement, how the police department and the property maintenance department will coordinate concerning those subsequent notices to lien holders, et cetera, the DMV data. That's all we have. I think the next thing is to conduct a public hearing and then glean any feedback that the council, receive any feedback that the council may have.
All right. I'll hereby open the public hearing.
No one has signed up to speak.
I'll hereby close the public hearing. Is there any questions of council reference to any of this?
This ought to be a field day for lawyers.
You going back into practice?
I'm thinking about it.
All right. Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Item 6 is to hold a public hearing and consider introducing an ordinance amending the Chapter 82 M Article 4 inoperable and abandoned vehicles, the title in Sections 82-121 and 82-168. Mr. Hamp.
So Mayor Allen and members of council, this is largely clarifying and updating the language to conform with the state code. The definitions and updates are less significant than in the previous ordinance, though you might find them interesting. For example, an abandoned vehicle is left unattended on public property for more than 48 hours in violation of a state law or local ordinance, has remained on private property without the consent of the owner or person in control of the property for more than 48 hours, regardless of whether it is brought onto the private property with the consent of the owner or person in control of the private property. And then finally, is left unattended on the shoulder of a primary highway. So basically, this is largely definition improvement and update.
Thank you. Is that it?
Yes, sir.
I'll hereby open the public hearing.
No one has signed up to speak.
I'll hereby close the public hearing. Any questions or comments in reference to this?
I've just extend my gratitude to staff and to putting this together. I think increasingly in my 2 years, this has been an increasing comment from neighbors and neighborhoods of disabled and abandoned vehicles literally littering neighborhoods. So I think it's great that we're finally getting to what is fully permissible by Virginia law. So I appreciate it.
They'll be busy for a while.
Yep.
Well, this is
For a long while. I know it's not going to be cleared up overnight and probably not over the next year or so. It's a lot of vehicles when you ride over this city that be in violations here. So they got their work cut out with a limited number of resources to go after it. So understand.
Yes, sir.
Is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Item 7 is to hold a public hearing and consider introducing an ordinance approving the conveyance of certain city-owned real property to the Waynesboro High School Board. Mr. Hamp.
So, Mayor Allen and members of council, as a matter of just practical administration, and for the fact that there are certain properties that the schools use, have control of, and ensure, their ownership of those parcels should be lawfully reflected. And Dr. Castle and I have discovered on several occasions instances in which there are certain parcels that are clearly under the control, use, and purview of the schools that are still reflected as parcels owned by the municipal organization. This would seek to transfer those parcels to ownership, lawful ownership of the Waynesboro Public Schools, and clarify that for administration, insurance, and maintenance purposes. The agenda briefing memo that you received identified 4 properties that would be subject to the recommended transfer. I might suggest this evening that we limit the action, amend the ordinance and limit the action to 2 parcels, being 1018 West Main Street, which is formerly the Window World building and is now presently the Alternative Education Center, known as the Giant Academy, associated with the function of Waynesboro High School. And then also 1100 West Main Street, which is the former laundromat property. These 2 properties were acquired by the city in anticipation and support of the Waynesboro High School renovation project. Several properties remain reflected as owned by the city, but under the lawful use and control of the schools. And those parcels include 548 Rosser Avenue, which is the Westwood Hills Elementary School site, 301 Pine Avenue, which is the central administrative offices, and then 941 First Street, which has co-located Wayne Hills Preschool Center and the Department of Public Works administrative functions. Because in the case of 301 Pine and First Street, there are co-located uses, would be my recommendation that the staff undertake an examination of the ability to separate and subdivide those parcels and then transfer the parcel that is under the use and responsibility of the schools to them at a subsequent time. With respect to with respect to Pine Avenue, the former Jackson Wilson Elementary School building, now the home for VPAS and the Senior Center, is located on a large parcel that includes the administrative offices and a portion of the soccer field. I think in a similar situation, that, to the best of our ability and under certain circumstances, should be subdivided prior to conveyance. And then finally, Mr. Short points out a consideration that is worthy of additional review before the conveyance of Westwood Hills Elementary School. So where we end up with this evening is a modified recommendation from me that we focus on 1018 West Main Street and 1100 West Main Street for the benefit of the high school project, recognizing also that that Waynesboro High School campus currently consists of multiple parcels and will likely be back before you with a consolidation, and at that time perhaps would be better to include the 301 Pine Avenue. That was a little bit circuitous. I apologize.
You lost me. But, all right, so we'll go ahead with the public hearing now.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'll open the public hearing.
No one has signed
Well,
up to speak.
we have a lady back
I'm
here.
sorry.
You come up to the podium so people at home can hear you, please. Give your name and address, please.
C.R. Barrett, 401 Ridge Circle in Waynesboro. I'm not signed up to speak. I just wondered, what's the reason for the conveyance? Why is it advantageous?
So it's not particularly advantageous one way or another. The reason is because these parcels are under the supervision, control, use of the public school system. Therefore, they're paying insurance, they're providing maintenance, and they're owned by the city of Waynesboro. And I think for matters of risk management, liability, and better definition of responsibility, it makes sense that they would be listed as the owners.
This sounds like a good business definition mode, if
That's a perhaps more succinct way to put it. Yes, sir.
everybody on board.
I have another question.
Well, you only can get one shot at it. What's your,
Well, because I think we're still open in the public hearing.
right. So, is anybody else other than you want to speak? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Now, questions?
I don't have any.
Everybody good? All right, so would there be a motion to introduce as amended?
So moved.
Thank you. Item 8 is to consider introducing an ordinance amending Chapter 78, Taxation, Section 78-8, Administrative Refunds of the City Code. Mr. Hamp.
Try to do a better job of this one, sir. In certain instances, when it is determined that because of an erroneous assessment by the Commissioner of Revenue, an individual overpays their taxes and is due a refund, the Code of Virginia provides that an administrative refund may be furnished up to $2,500 simply with the certification by the Commissioner that their erroneous assessment is the cause of the overpayment. Previously, the council had adopted an ordinance that required the city attorney to perform sort of a second review and confirmation of the initial determination made by the Commissioner of Revenue. In our current arrangement, in which we outsource our legal counsel's primary office is located in Harrisonburg, it makes that second review and confirmation sometimes more difficult, time-consuming to achieve. Secondly, in my view, that if you have a duly elected Commissioner of Revenue who certifies an erroneous assessment and the Code of Virginia limits the reimbursement to $2,500, it's probably sufficient to follow the provisions of the state code. And I think that facilitates a prompt refund to taxpayers who have overpaid in error. So it is my recommendation that we amend the local ordinance to reflect the provisions of the state code and require only that the Commissioner of Revenue's certification be necessary for administrative refunds up to $2,500. Refunds that exceed $2,500 would come to council for approval.
Are there any questions of Mr. Hamp?
I would just ask if that, as part of that effort, if the city attorneys could also just provide a memorandum to council members to notify us of those cases when upon your review, you see fit to do that, just so I think we have some situational awareness of refunds that are taking place in the city.
Are you talking about my review?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yeah, just aware.
Well, this takes me out of the loop, so I wouldn't have a review. So I wouldn't be in the loop to be able to provide.
Oh, I see. I see. Now I'm following. Okay, I missed a word in there.
Revenue send you a memo?
I mean, I think it would be helpful to, at least on a quarterly basis or something, to have the commission, that council's aware of the magnitude of erroneous assessments in the city, because I think that we have a responsibility to know if
Mr. Hamp, do you know how many we did last year?
I don't know. I would imagine that it's a half a dozen or less, but that would be, I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess.
Okay. Yep.
How about if so this evening we're simply introducing, how about if I get that information and report back before final adoption at our next meeting?
And maybe we can paddle down the river to get some type of way that we'd have a checks and balance.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. All right, is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Item 9 is to receive information about the Virginia Rural Water Association's 2018 Small System of the Year Award presented to the City of Waynesboro. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, each year the Virginia Rural Water Association honors Virginia's utility providers that have significant and exceptional achievement in wastewater and water industries. At their most recent conference, the City of Waynesboro was awarded the Small System of the Year Award, and this is from dozens of applicants across the Commonwealth. And the city was recognized for outstanding accomplishments in the areas of maintaining effective and efficient wastewater treatment operations, for remaining compliant with all environmental regulations to protect the health of the South River and Chesapeake Bay, and for staff performances, including state licensure achievements, training, continuing education, and overall wastewater operations. I think it would be interesting to note that Last year, we treated more than 848 million gallons of water at the city's wastewater treatment plant. And since the plant opened in 2010, we have remained 100% compliant with all state and federal regulations, and that we've indicated outstanding plant performances that are far below the quantitative limits for the DEQ required testing parameters for water quality and nutrient loading. One of the things that was established early in the plant, we have really in other public works operations as well, as identification of key performance indicators. And these are metrics that are used to monitor and adjust plant operations. And so, for example, a compliance rate is a key performance indicator, and we've been 100% compliant. The planned maintenance ratio to unexpected maintenance is another key performance indicator. One of the key performance indicators that might be of interest to council is the ratio of operating and maintenance costs per million gallons of waste treated. And when the plant was established, the key performance indicator was established at $750 per million gallons of water treated, and the average over the last 5 years has been less than that at about $684 per million gallons. So tonight, we recognize the plant operators. Ross Moreland is here as the plant engineer, is also the plant engineer for the water treatment plant and oversees the landfill post-closure here in Waynesboro. Troy Eppert is the chief operator at the plant. Operators Scott Balsley, Dustin Fisher, Matt Nyman, and Ted Brown are recognized, as well as the lab director Marvin Goodby, lab technician Tony Reed, and maintenance technicians Brad Williams and Jacob Long, and as well Cliff Dowdy, who does maintenance at both the water and wastewater treatment plants. Hats off to you, gentlemen. Good job. Something not many people know about me, I actually started my career at Waynesboro more than 35 years ago as a wastewater treatment operator. I was licensed by the Commonwealth, as you gentlemen are, and it was a great experience. It was quite a different experience 35 years ago than it is here at the modern plant in Waynesboro we have today, but I appreciate what you gentlemen do for the community.
Well, and I would add on to that, you know, we have a fantastic plant down there that we should be proud of, and it's one of our biggest debts that I think we have with us. But it wouldn't be worth anything unless we had the qualified and the employees that we have there to work it and to man it and to run it to the degree that y'all do. So congratulations to the fantastic job that you do for our city, and continue to do the outstanding work. Thank you, gentlemen.
I think it really does reflect well on our staff and the people that work on this, and should make us all proud to be part of the city. And
yeah, you know, building a great city is always about the people and its people, and you guys are just an outstanding example of just the tremendous things that we can do as a community. So thank you very much.
Item 9B is to receive information about the United States Environmental Protection Agency Pisces Award presented to the City of Waynesboro. Mr. Shaw.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. The Pisces Award is an award that is issued by the Environmental Protection Agency for communities that make good use of the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Funds. Pisces stands for Performance and Innovation in the State Revolving Loan Fund, Creating Environmental Success. And the city received this reward for its efforts at the Jefferson Park Pond. As you're well aware, in that area we had a field and a dry pond. There was a small creek that ran through the middle of it, and through the leadership of Trafford McCrae and Ms. McReynolds, a plan was devised to essentially capture the water from that creek and create wetlands areas, forebays and ponds to reduce nutrient loading to downstream to the South River and ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. And the the effort was that's facilitated by the Timmons Group engineers and by local contractor Linco. We utilized an $870,000 0% interest loan and a state grant of $860,000 for this effort. The facility itself is considered a Tier 2 facility, which means that it removes at least 75% of incoming phosphorus and at least 55% of incoming nitrogen. This project also received recently a Chesapeake Bay Award, so it really is a model, and in fact we've had folks from various agencies and engineering groups come to tour the facility and look at it, and ultimately we're developing walking trails and interpretive signage. I think it becomes a great habitat for birds and other wildlife in that neighborhood. One of the significant accomplishments and benefits to the city will be that, as you're well aware, we hold an MS4 permit, and as a permit holder, we expect that in the coming years we will be required to reduce nutrient loading through a total maximum daily load calculation that it basically says that as a permit holder, you have to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus by certain percentages. And that can be a very expensive venture. That what it basically means is you have to retrofit a lot of the stormwater infrastructure to be able to capture those nutrients and attenuate their damage downstream. So this pond will give us really significant credit, and so the dollars spent here will pay dividend down the road as we meet compliance under the TMDL statute. Again, I would recognize Mr. McCrae and Mr. McReynolds for their leadership and the Timmons Group and Linco for their assistance.
Well, once again, another fantastic job. Jeffrey, thank you. And
Yeah.
Mr. McCrae, thank you, sir.
Awesome. Thank you.
Number 10 is a presentation of a proclamation naming May the 15th National Peace Officers Memorial Day, and the week of May the 13th through the 19th is National Law Enforcement Officers Week. Mr. Hamp.
Yes, sir, if I may. Whereas the Congress and the President of the United States have designated May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day and the week in which it falls as Police Week, and whereas the members of law enforcement for the city of Waynesboro, Virginia, play an essential role in safeguarding the rights and freedoms of the citizens of Waynesboro, and whereas it is important that all citizens know and understand the problems, duties, and responsibilities of their police department, and that members of our police department recognize their duty to serve the people by safeguarding life and property, by protecting them against violence or disorder, and by protecting the innocent against deception and the weak against oppression or intimidation. And whereas the Police Department of Waynesboro, Virginia, has grown to be modern and scientific law enforcement agency, which unceasingly provides a vital public service, now therefore I, Bruce E. Allen, Mayor, on behalf of the City Council of Waynesboro, call upon all citizens of Waynesboro and upon all patriotic, civic, and educational organizations to observe the week of May 13th through 19th, 2018 as Police Week, with appropriate ceremonies in which all of our people may join in commemorating police officers, past and present, who by their faithful and loyal devotion to responsibilities have rendered a dedicated service to their communities, and in doing so have established for themselves an enviable and enduring reputation for preserving the rights and security of all citizens. I further call upon the citizens of Waynesboro to observe Tuesday, May 15, 2018, as Peace Officers Memorial Day, to honor those peace officers who, through their courageous deeds, have lost their lives or have become disabled in the performance of duty. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the city of Waynesboro to be affixed this 14th day of May, 2018. Bruce E. Allen, Mayor.
Thank you. Chief, if you'll come up.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, first of all, I'd like to thank you for this proclamation and just remind everybody that in observance of National Police Week, we'll be having a brief ceremony at Main Street United Methodist Church Thursday night at 7 p.m. Delegate Steve Landis will be there as our guest speaker, so I encourage everybody to come out and support our men and women in law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Item 11 is to consider introducing an appropriation ordinance appropriating a portion of the Industrial Park Development Committed Reserves in the amount of $2,401 to the sewer fund for expenses related to the removal and replacement of a sewer encasement. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I think you're well aware that the Virginia Department of Transportation is currently pursuing the design and ultimate construction of what we refer to as the southern connector that will connect Shenandoah Village Drive to Delphine through city-owned industrial property. As the road leaves Shenandoah Village Drive, it crosses a small creek downstream of Corner Springs, and it's been discovered that there is a sewer pipe that crosses that creek and is in an encasement. The encasement essentially serves as a weir that constricts water from the creek and creates a pool. And this complicates engineering and regulatory permitting in the area. So the city will then is charged with basically relocating the pipe onto piers so that the pool can clear. We have funds in an on-call services budget line item that would be paired with the $2,400 we're asking the council to appropriate from the Industrial Park Reserve this evening to be able to complete the permitting and design for the relocation of the sewer pipe.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Item 11B is to consider appropriating $25,000 of Fire Board funds for the purchase of protective gear for firefighters. Mr. Hamp.
This $25,000 in Fire Board fund is also known as aid to localities. These are state funds provided to municipalities that have professional firefighting agencies. This is 10 sets of bunker gear that are expiring. I think you'll recall a conversation we had around the breathing apparatus that are expiring. Protective equipment and protective gear often carries a durable life limit from certification, AASHTO type agencies, and this is replacing 10 sets that are expiring along with 8 pairs of boots that are also expiring. And again, to emphasize, these are not local dollars. These are state funds that are provided for eligible expenses. Oftentimes we buy equipment or training. We have from time to time purchased vehicles. But the balance in that account has reached close to $182,000. So I would encourage the approval of this appropriation and the appropriate use of these state aid funds.
Are there any questions of Mr. Hamp? If not, is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Item 11C is to consider introducing an ordinance appropriating a portion of the courthouse security reserve in the amount of $6,305 to the general fund for upgrades to the camera systems in the courts. Mr. Hamp.
This request comes from City Sheriff Joe Harris Jr. At the prompting of the judges. And again, these are not local tax funds, but rather fees that accumulate in a specific reserve for the purpose of improving courthouse security. The balance presently is $21,778. With this appropriation, the balance will fall to $15,473. So that reserve is in good stead.
Any questions? If not, is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Item 12 is to consider reappointing a member to the Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission for a 3-year term ending June the 30th, 2021. Mr. Hamp.
Mr. Warren Rusty Johnson presently serves in this position, has indicated a willingness to serve through reappointment.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to reappoint Mr. Johnston?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Item 12B is to consider appointing 2 candidates to the Redeveloping and Housing Authority. Mr. Hamp?
Ms. Mary Scott Miller presents her interest in serving in this capacity, as does Mr. Calvin Woodson. Ms. Miller would serve a term ending August 31, 2019, completing a term vacated by Ms. Nancy Coiner, and Mr. Woodson would serve an unexpired 4-year term ending August 31st, 2021.
Thank you. Is there a motion to appoint Mrs. Miller and Mr. Woodson?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Item 13 is to consider adopting a resolution rescheduling the May 28th regular business meeting to May 29th at 7 p.m. State code prohibits the local elected body from meeting on a state or federal holiday. So is there a motion to adopt this?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. Item 14 is to consider authorizing the city manager to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Soccer Association of the Charlottesville area, SOCA, regarding a soccer complex at Basic Park. Mr. Hamp.
So yes, sir, the City Council is asked to consider authorizing the city manager to enter into a MOU with the soccer organization of the Charlotte's area, or SOCA, for the development of a soccer complex in Basic Park. You'll recall we had a presentation in February about the potential and conceptual design for the facility. This agreement would allow that SOCA would have a 1-year feasibility study period to determine if the project is in fact achievable or feasible. Subsequent to such a determination, the city and SOCA would enter into a use agreement, a more formal and specific use agreement with a 30-year term. That if we get to that point in the proceedings, it will be necessary to have a public hearing on the matter before this council could enter into the use agreement. The MOU defines the responsibilities and contributions that were described in the presentation to the City Council in February. The council will be obligated to construct certain improvements to the park and share in the expense of lighting 2 fields. SOCA will be responsible for constructing and maintaining the fields, and for that will enjoy exclusive right to use and control those fields. General access to the park will be preserved to include access to the kayak and boat launch area, South River frontage, and designated children's fishing area. It's anticipated that the build-out of the soccer complex would occur over time, and the public will continue to enjoy those areas of the park that are not under development for the soccer complex. So generally, I think this is a positive thing. Again, this allows for a study period. If that study period proves successful, SOCA and the municipal staff will be back in front of you with a more specific and enduring memorandum of agreement and a more specific plan of local investment paired with private investment.
Any questions of Mr. Hamp? Is there a motion to adopt the resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into the MOU?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries 5-0. 15 is communications, correspondence, and calendar.
I don't have anything this evening, sir.
Thank you, sir. 16 is citizens' comment period.
No one has signed up to speak this evening.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn? Mr. Marks, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.